Amen. So if you've got your Bibles with you, would you open up to the book of Judges? We're going to be in chapter 11 this morning. We're continuing this study through the book of Judges. It's a book that's written to describe how after God brought Israel into the land of Canaan, how the land of Canaan got into the people of Israel. Israel was called to be a kingdom of priests. They were called to be God's light. They were called to be God's agents. They were called to bring the knowledge of the glory of Yahweh to the ends of the earth, to all peoples, to everyone, everywhere. And God established them in the land of promise, the land that he had promised to Abram when he first called him. That from there they would mediate, they would radiate the glory and the goodness of Yahweh to the other peoples, the peoples that had rebelled and turned away from God. But instead of Israel functioning like that, they become corrupted. They begin to become like the people of the land. And so in the book of Judges, we just have this cycle over and over and over again. Israel forgets Yahweh, their God. Israel stops serving and worshiping Yahweh, their God, and they commit the evil. They begin to serve and worship the gods of the Canaanites. And so God brings covenant judgment upon them. That was clearly spelled out and accepted by the Israelites, that there would be blessing for faithful obedience, there would be cursing for disobedience. And so God brings judgment upon them, often in the form of foreign peoples and enslavement and conquering. And eventually the people cry out, and then God, because of who God is, would deliver them. And so that's the cycle that we see over and over and over again. We're now in this new cycle, and we've got a new deliverer. So we're actually going to start at the end of chapter 10. It says this, that then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead, and the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." It seems pretty straightforward, but it's really a sad beginning to this part of the story. So a new enemy has come. The Ammonites have invaded. They've come into the land of Gilead. And so the people gathered together. And on one hand, what they do makes sense. They're like, all right, who's going to be in charge? We got to have somebody that's going to be the point of the spear. We got to have somebody that's going to lead us in this battle against these occupiers. Who's going to be in charge? So it makes sense, but it's incredibly tragic because of what they don't do. They don't ask Yahweh. They don't seek the Lord. There's no spiritual life demonstrated here. It's all pragmatism, practicality, human-centered. All right, what do you guys think we should do? So we got another great instance in history of the blind leading the blind, of fools directing fools. Who do you think should lead? Who should we have be our leader? They say to one another. Now, Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. That phrase in the Hebrew, we've encountered that phrase before. Gibor Hayil, a mighty man of valor. Gideon was actually described that way. Remember when we walked through the book of Ruth, Boaz was a Gibor Hayil, a mighty man of valor, a warrior. And so it says Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. So here we have this, we're introduced to this man, Jephthah, and on one hand he's a mighty warrior, on the other hand he's the son of a prostitute, which is a clear reflection of the reality of how Canaanized, how corrupted Israel has become. His father is not following fidelity and faithfulness to marriage, to his wife. He's going out, he's visiting prostitutes, he's conceived a child. And so here's this child, Jephthah. It's not his fault that his father was doing that. It's not his fault that his mother was a prostitute, but that's his reality. And that creates some sketchy dynamics at home. It says Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." And what they're doing here is a direct violation of the terms of the covenant in the law, in the Torah that's been given to them. That inheritance comes through the father. That's clearly spelled out in Deuteronomy. It's clearly spelled out in the law. So they're, again, ignoring the terms of covenant, ignoring God's instructions. They're saying, we don't want to share anything with you. You have a different mom, so get to going, right? And so they drive him out. And it says, then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tov, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So I don't know if you've been around through this series and if you've been paying attention, but there's some echoes, some repetition, some connections intentionally being developed by the author. We're going to see as we walk through the story of Jephthah, there's some significant connections between Jephthah and Gideon. They both start as nobodies, but they're called mighty warriors. Like Gideon was hiding in the threshing floor, and the angel of Yahweh goes, "Hey, mighty warrior." Jephthah's called a mighty warrior, but his brothers drive him off into a land where he's surrounded by worthless fellows. So they both start as nobodies, but God has a plan and a purpose for them in spite of their reality. But they also both are going to end up as tyrants. They're both empowered by the Spirit of God. God comes upon them in a profound and personal way, in a powerful way, and gives them incredible, spectacular victories. But they also both express doubt and end up testing God. We also see some connections between Jephthah and Abimelech, Gideon's son, the one who claimed the kingdom for himself. They were both born of foreign women, secondary women, not the wives. They're both surrounded by worthless men. They both, Abimelech and Jephthah, as we're going to see, were both skilled orators. They used their words to accumulate power unto themselves. And they both end up killing their own family members. And both end up barren without a future at the end. So these patterns, they're intentional. They're trying to draw us to the realities of what it means to forsake God. To break faithfulness to the covenant and to bring upon yourself the judgment of Yahweh. So let's dig into Jephthah's story. Jephthah's name, by the way, means may he open, or may God open. I think it's kind of a subtle play on words on what he does. He opens his mouth a lot, and it doesn't go well for him. And we're going to talk about that this morning. So, after a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader." So we don't get the intermediate dialogue. We get the say, "Hey, who should we make our leader?" And then the next thing we see is they send a delegation out to the land of Tov to Jephthah, and they said, hey, come on back and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites. And Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress? It's a little snarky, and understandably so. Oh, you didn't want me then, but now when you need me, oh, now you want me? You get the sense that he's going to try to milk this for as much as he can. He wants them to feel embarrassed and ashamed. He knows they need him. He doesn't need them, but they need him. So he's going to play this out for his advantage. And so the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, that is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So they sweeten the pot. We don't want you just to lead. We don't want you just to fight. We want you to be the head over all. The same ones that threw you out, the same ones that rejected you, now you get to be in charge. And Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gives them over to me, I will be your head. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, Yahweh will be witnesses between us if we do not do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before Yahweh at Mizpah. So what we have here is it's very interesting. If you were here last week, the conversation that Israel as a whole had with Yahweh, with God, is now mirrored between Jephthah and the delegation. So that they come and ask, and they get a sarcastic response, and then they come back again, and then finally there's this relenting and movement. And so here's Jephthah, and he's going to be in the game now. So that it says, then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, what do you have against me, that you have come to me to fight against my land? How quickly it's his land. Did you notice that? Like one minute he's out dwelling in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of nobodies. Now he's king. He's like, what are you doing fighting against me? Why are you in my land? It's pretty quick. He says, the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, well, because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land, from the Arnon to the Jabbok to the Jordan. Now, therefore, restore it peacefully. So he sends the message, hey, why are you guys here? And he's like, well, because you stole our land. And he says, Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to them, thus says Jephthah, Israel didn't take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. So he's going to respond historically. He says, that's not what happened. We didn't take your land. We didn't take your land or the land of the Moabites. When they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. And they also sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. They knew they had, in order to get into Canaan, they had to go through the land of Moab or through the land of Edom. And they sent messengers, said, we just want to go through. We're not here for you. But both of those kings said, no, you can't do it. So then they journeyed through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom. They took the long way. They go around the land of Edom and the land of Moab and arrived on the east side of the land of Moab and camped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, please let us pass through your land to our country. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. And Yahweh, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of the land of the Amorites who inhabited the country. So the Ammonite king is saying, hey, you stole our land. And Jephthah says, we didn't take your land. We took the land of the Amorites. We didn't take the land of the Ammonites. You're confused. That's not true. It's simply not a reality. And by the way, it was Yahweh that gave us that victory. So they took possession of all the territory of the Amorites, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. So then Yahweh, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel. And are you to take possession of it? So God defeats the Amorites, and now you think somehow it belongs to you instead of to the people whose God delivered it? And then this is fascinating to me. He says, will you not possess what Chemosh, your God, gives you to possess? So he's like, listen, we have what we have because Yahweh gave it to us. Why don't you have what your God gave you? Fascinating, what's strange about this is he says to the Ammonites, why don't you have what your God Chemosh gave to you? But Chemosh was not the God of the Ammonites. It's the God of the Moabites. And I find that interesting because Jephthah is feeling pretty confident, pretty cocky. Why are you doing it in my land? Why are you attacking me? What's going on? And he's engaging in this dialogue, and he's debating back and forth, and he doesn't have his facts straight. And there apparently wasn't a good fact checker around for him. There is truly nothing new under the sun. He's like, well, why don't you have what Chemosh, your God, gave you to possess? And all that Yahweh, our God, has dispossessed before us, we will possess. Are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? Which the answer to that is actually kind of yes. But technically, he did go against them, but he never contended with them over the land because Israel never tried to take his land because it was not the land that God had called them to possess. So it's like saying, hey, are you better? And it's interesting to note that the Ammonite king is never named here. He's just this nameless leader of an invading force. And Jephthah's like, are you, oh nameless one, greater than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? He didn't even do this. Who do you think you are? When Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon for 300 years, why did you not deliver them within that time? It's kind of a pastoral exaggeration there. 300 years. It's a rhetorical point. He's like, we've been here for a long, long time, and you haven't said anything before, so why all of a sudden do you think you can make this claim? So, he's doing everything he can to negotiate out of this invasion, and he's arguing on historical grounds, he's arguing on religious theological grounds, he's arguing on personal grounds. He's laying out this case. And then he says this, he says, I therefore have not sinned against you, and you do me wrong by making war on me. Now, Yahweh, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. That's not bad. We got to give Jephthah credit. Like he gets that right. It's going to be Yahweh's decision at the end of the day. And the king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words of Jephthah that he had sent to them. So it's going to be war. It's going to be a battle. It's not going to be he's not going to be able to talk his way out of this, even though he gave it a pretty valiant shot. He made good arguments. But the Ammonites weren't there to reason. They didn't care about his arguments. So they were going to go to war. And verse 29 says, then the Spirit of Yahweh, the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah. So just like we've seen over and over again from Ehud and Barak and Shamgar and Gideon, the Spirit of Yahweh comes upon Jephthah. the mercy of God here, I find so beautiful. God wasn't consulted by Israel. God wasn't asked who should be the leader. The leader that they chose was not a good dude, right? Has all sorts of flaws and character issues and problems, and yet God, in his mercy and his kindness, comes upon Jephthah to use this flawed vessel to deliver Israel against the Ammonites. That's good news if we got any cracked pots in the room. Now, if you're perfect here this morning, isn't that cute? But if you know what it means to not be perfect, and if you know how deeply you need God to be merciful, this is good news. The Spirit of Yahweh was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead, he passed on to the Ammonites. So now he's leading the army. He's empowered by the Spirit, and he's taking the battle to the Ammonites. And it goes so wrong so quickly. And Jephthah made a vow to Yahweh. And said, notice here, God didn't ask for a vow. God had already put the Spirit upon him. He'd already just declared to the Ammonite king, Yahweh's going to decide this thing. But here he is now, this mighty warrior, the one that has been elected by the people, the one that has been empowered by God. He's afraid, he's doubting, and he's got to enter into this negotiation with God. You've been there, right? Like, God, if you help me pass this test. 7th grade math. You remember that? Do you remember that? Like, God, if she says yes when I ask her out, I promise I'll go to church for a long... Like, look, we enter into this bartering, this negotiation, this and of course the problem is that, like, if you're going to barter with somebody, you got to have something that they need. And I hate to break this to you, but you have nothing that God needs. All right? Let's just clear the air. Like, God's not going, oh, I hope they help me out. Right? Like, I hope Jephthah, does what I ask. Yo, this is so unnecessary. But fear, doubt, insecurity lead him into this negotiation, and it's formal. He makes a vow. He makes a vow to Yahweh. He doesn't make a vow to himself, like, I'm going to do this. He doesn't make a vow to the Israelites. He makes a vow to Yahweh. And the nature of the vow. Here's his bartering. If you will give me the Ammonites into my hand, whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be Yahweh's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So, like, this is worse than thinking you have something to offer God. This is offering God something that he would never ask for or want. God doesn't want human sacrifice. God doesn't want a burnt offering. So, like, do you see how ridiculous this is? Like, how tragic this is? Hey, if you give me victory, God's already put the Spirit on him. If you give me victory, when I come home and everything's good, whatever comes out the front door, it's yours. I'm not just going to give it to you, God. I'll burn it. And there's no response from God. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and Yahweh gave them into his hand. Now, let's be clear. I mean, the author's making no indication that Yahweh gave them into their hand because of this stupid vow he made. That's what Yahweh was always going to do. But now, Now that vow has a life of its own. It's got validity to it. So Jephthah crossed and fought against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand, and he struck them from Arior to the neighborhood of Minnith, and 20 cities as far as Abel Keramim. Love that place, don't you? With a great blow. And the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah. And behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and dances, as one does. So your dad has just been elevated to head and has led this mighty victory over this incredible enemy oppression. And now he's returning as the triumphant, valiant warrior. And she's so excited, and she comes out to receive him, to celebrate him. And she was his only child. So it's like, it just gets worse and worse and worse. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, and this breaks my heart. He makes it her fault. Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. Can you? I mean, the lack of self-awareness, the narcissism, I'm going to play the victim of the stupid and foolish vow that I made. You did this to me, he says. She's the one that's supposed to die. He says, for I have opened my mouth to Yahweh, and I cannot take back my vow. And you know, from a covenant perspective, he's absolutely right. The Torah is absolutely clear on this. Numbers 30, verse 2. If a man vows to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So, he's right. He's obligated himself. This is not God's will. It was not God's design, not God's desire. All on him. And yet, he has now obligated himself to keep his word. And her response, it just adds another level of heartbreak. As her response is so surprising. She says to him, my father, you have opened your mouth to Yahweh. So do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that Yahweh has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites. Why is it always the good ones? Like her response is like, well, you made a vow. And you made that vow to Yahweh. And Yahweh, he gave you victory over the Ammonites, so you're in. You got to do this. But she said she's a little bit like her father. She's got a negotiator in her. So she said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Give me 2 months. Leave me alone for 2 months that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions. Let me mourn the loss of my future. Let me gather with my friends and let us weep, let us mourn, let us grieve together. Give me 2 months. And so he said, go. He sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. And if that doesn't turn your stomach, you're not paying attention to this story. She had never known a man. It had become a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year. Isn't that interesting? Nobody's celebrating Jephthah. Nobody's remembering him. Nobody's honoring him, but the memory of that daughter, that life that was cut off, that life that was ripped away from her, was celebrated by Israel for generations to come. For generations to come. So just another really, really, and I think the technical term is icky story here. It's brutal, it's harsh, it's ugly. And it's that way on purpose because sin and death are evil and brutal and harsh, and we live in an evil and brutal and harsh reality, and we do evil and brutal and harsh things, and we need to learn. And I think this text says this to us. It says, be very, very careful what you say. Because words are powerful. I mean, on one hand, words are cheap. You know, talk is cheap. It's easy to say things. But on the other hand, like, words are powerful. There's a cliche for a reason that the pen is mightier than the sword. Words have the ability to bring profound transformation. You know, the scriptures talk about this so much. The book of Proverbs just has an abundance of information about this. You know, one of my favorites is Proverbs 15:4. A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. Words can bring life. They can give life. And you've experienced that, haven't you? Somebody gives you the right word at the right time, right when you needed it, and it fortifies you, it gives you vision, it gives you hope, it directs you, it strengthens you, and encourages. Like, it can give life. The right word at the right way it can make all the difference. But you've also experienced the wrong word, the wrong time. It's deflated you, crushed you, broken your heart. And here's the reality that we'd probably not like to think about this morning. That's not only happened to you, that's happened from you. You've brought life with your words, and you've also brought death with your words. This is just reality. Our words are powerful. They're profound. They can bring life and death. And Jephthah was so foolish in his words. Casual. Unthought. He only had one daughter. Who did he think was going to come out of his house? Wishful thinking. The level of thoughtlessness, the lack of introspection, the spontaneous vomit of words out of his mouth to Yahweh literally took the life of his daughter. Solomon talks about this in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. He says this, when you make a vow to God, do not delay in paying it. He has no pleasure in fools. You got to pay what you vow. It's better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. And then this next line, y'all, You're looking for a verse to memorize? How about you memorize this? Let not your mouth lead you into sin. Let not your mouth lead you into sin. Because you've done that, right? Let not your mouth lead you into sin. Don't say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity. We can talk ourselves into all sorts of trouble. We've got to be careful about our words. We have to guard our tongue. We have to be wise. Because God is the one you must fear. You know, James makes the same case in his epistle. In James chapter 4, verse 13, we read this. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow, we'll go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. There's this sense of humility that recognizes that man plans and God laughs. That despite our best efforts to erect and maintain the illusion that we're in control, we're actually in control of very little. But one of the things that we should at least try to control is what we say. Because our words matter. Now, James had even stronger things to say about the tongue and our words. In chapter 3, he says, you know, the tongue, it's a small little thing. But it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. You ever just said something flippant, something casual, just not even thinking about it, and it turned into something crazy? It says the tongue is a fire. It's a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life. It's set on fire by hell. Every kind of beast and reptile and bird and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison, for with it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, my sisters, these things ought not to be. The tongue, our words, foolish and rash vows, thoughtless words can create devastation beyond imagining. So we need to have a sober and healthy fear and reverence over our tongues and how we speak. Because our words matter and words are powerful. And we can either bring life or we can bring death. And especially when we're talking to God. We should avoid negotiating, and bartering, and pledging things that we think God might want from us that in reality he probably doesn't want at all. Let me conclude with this thought, and we'll go to Jesus for this. We need to keep our words simple, straightforward. There's this idea that in our culture, bigger is better, more is better. An abundance of words, an abundance of rationality, abundance of... What happens is we end up rationalizing and justifying to ourselves and to others all sorts of evil and calling it good and calling good evil. In this abundance of words, we need to learn to keep it simple. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, he says, you've heard it. It was said to those of old, don't swear falsely. Perform to Yahweh what you have sworn. You got to keep your oath, Jesus says. You know it. That's what the law requires. You got to keep your oath. But I say to you, don't take an oath at all. Either by the heavens, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. So, okay, the law says if you take an oath, you've got to keep it. But that doesn't mean you've got to take an oath. And Jesus is like, how's that worked out? So here's my advice, Jesus says, don't do it. Just don't do it. Don't make flippant and rash and spontaneous declarations, and certainly don't bring God into the mix of your agenda and your plan. He says, do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Some of y'all can't even make a hair. Wah, wah. But listen to the wisdom of Jesus. And let it just settle over you this morning. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. We don't need to negotiate with a sovereign God of grace. You don't need to barter with God to get God to be good. He is good. You don't have anything to offer to make him love you. In fact, there's nothing you can do that will make God love you any more, and there's nothing you can do that will make God love you any less. His love is not contingent upon your performance or your behavior or your acquisitions or your attitudes or your accomplishments. He loves you because he is love. So there's no place for fear. There's no place for uncertainty. If God is for you, who can be against you? What can separate you from the love of God in Jesus the King? Can heights or depths? Can sword or persecutions? Can powers earthly or powers spiritual? No! In all this, we're more than conquerors. Not because of what we do, but because of what Jesus has already done. Because of what Jesus is currently doing, and because what Jesus will certainly do in the future. You have no need to make oaths unto the Lord, to barter, to try to manipulate, to try to convince God to see things your way. Church, let it go. Our job is not to use our words to try to get God to see things our way. We should use our words to help ourselves and to help others see things God's way. We should be simple and straightforward, thoughtful and honest. We should trust that the Spirit is able to help us with our words. There's a promise or two about that in the scriptures. But when we don't have the right words, when we can't maybe even help ourselves from saying the wrong words, that we have the Spirit of God given to us. Sometimes we need the Spirit of God to give us wisdom, to give us courage to say the right thing. Sometimes, and I don't know about y'all, but for me, maybe more often than not, I need the Spirit of God to shut me up. Because there is a time to speak, and there is a time to be silent. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. And make no foolish vows unto the Lord, because he does not delight in fools. But he loves us anyway. Anybody want to say amen this morning? Amen.